Okay, so that's probably enough of that. Like I said in the last video, I figured, what the hell, why not have my own music as the intro to some of these videos? And well, that was my own music. Um, I wrote the music, I wrote the lyrics. A friend of mine performed the vocals. I did all the guitars, drums, all that stuff. Yeah. Anyways, so I am getting way off track on this here because we're supposed to be talking about the demand for money while we're on NyQuil. Or really, I guess at this point, the demand for money while we're waiting for the NyQuil to kick in at 11:39 p.m. on January 21st, 2021. Very momentous day because it's the day after Joseph R. McBiden has been inaugurated as 46th president of the United States, although I guess technically it's 45th because there was a president. I can't think of who it was off the top of my head, but there was a president that served twice, but it wasn't consecutive. So if you count that, well, he's kind of the 45th. But if you don't count that, then, well, he's 46th. But anyways, moving on from that, because we're talking about the demand for money on NyQuil and not U.S. politics or, I guess, melodic / progressive deathcore that your teacher makes in his spare time. And, oh, by the way, because I know this video is a little late for the day, I wasn't working on that all day. That's actually about, I don't know, about a month old. Yeah, so anyways, moving on. That's just more of a CYA meaning, yeah, cover your ass. And I definitely covered it. So let's start with the demand for money, shall we? So this video lecture is only going to cover the demand for money. The next lecture is going to cover the supply for money, and maybe it's going to have the equilibrium stuff in there. But a lot of these subsections will just be split up into short little videos. So you'll have this video to watch, and then you'll have a couple videos to watch next week. I think there should be, 4 or 5 more videos after this one covering this particular chapter or quote-unquote set of notes that I have posted on iLearn. So anyways, yeah, moving on. I am getting way off track here. This is what happens when you took your Vyvanse like 15 hours ago now. Yeah. ADD is a mofo. So if we're going to start with the demand for money, I guess we really need to try to find a way to tie it into things that we've already learned. So if you remember principles of micro, there's a demand for a good or service or asset, right? There's a price and there's the quantity. Well, the demand for money isn't really too different from that because, well, there's a demand schedule, right? There's a demand curve that we're looking at. Oh, excuse me. And it's going to be sensitive to changes in the price, changes in the quantity, and it's also going to be sensitive to income. So there's a price, a quantity, and then there's a relationship between them, and that relationship is the demand for money. Now, income plays a role in this, just like it did with demand in microeconomics. But the price of money is going to be a little different here. Because when you think about it, what is the price of money? It's like, hey, I want to buy $1 from you, so I'm going to give you $1.05. It's like, well, that doesn't make any effing sense. No pun on the sense there. So what is this price of money that we're talking about? Well, actually, it's an interest rate. Now, this interest rate, we're just going to denote it as capital R with a little subscript T there. That subscript T means that it's at time T. Time T means today. So this is the current interest rate. So the current interest rate, or really the current nominal interest rate, because any capital variable you see, or capitalized letter for a variable that you see, will be a nominal interest rate. Any lowercase variable you see will be a nominal variable. Any lowercase letters that you see acting as variables will be real variables. So if you see this uppercase R, that means it's a nominal interest rate. So the price of money is going to be the nominal interest rate. So yeah, this is the nominal interest rate. Now, there can also be an interest rate on money. Think of it as like R sub T with a little superscript M, just to mean like, the interest rate on money. We can think of this as like the federal funds rate. We're going to assume that it's 0 for now, just because it makes the demand function a little bit easier to look at. But then we will also consider a case where it's non-zero, and we'll sort of be able to cover some intuition and some theory behind what happens when it's non-zero. So the demand for money is, and drum roll please, this right here. You're probably like, oh my God, why did I take this class? I've seen nothing but formulas this whole time. But you're not really going to have to play with this formula too much, because what this tells us is that, first off, this little M over P thing is the nominal quantity of money, right? The capital M, that's the nominal quantity of money, and it's being divided by the price level. Hence, it's the real quantity of money, right? So we're looking at the demand for real money balances here. And the demand for real money balances is a function of income, or real income, because the lowercase y there. It's a function of real incomes and the nominal interest rate. Now, we can think of this interest rate as like an alternative interest rate. Think of it as like an outside option, right? It's what you could earn if you did something else with the money besides just hold on to it. So it's like an opportunity cost. Actually, it's not like an opportunity cost. It is an opportunity cost, as it makes it kind of cool. Because if you can do something else with it, right? Well, that's going to affect how much money you want to hold, right? If the interest rate is really, really high, if the outside option or the value of the outside option is really high, then why in the world would you want to hold more money? Because you could hold a little bit less money and then earn a higher interest rate, right? A higher rate of return on some other investment that you made while pursuing this quote-unquote outside option. Now, if there was to be an interest rate on money, like the FEF funds rate, it was supposed to be Fed funds rate, and that was a minor typo on my part, so forgive me for that. I don't know, I kind of like the FEF funds rate. We need to call it the Fed funds rate. I need to be an adult here. So like the Fed funds rate, we're going to denote it, say, RT with a little uppercase M, like I showed you before. And if we had this, well, the money demand would take this form instead. So it actually looks pretty close to what we had earlier, right? This guy. But instead of being a function of real incomes and this nominal interest rate, what we get is real incomes and the nominal interest rate subtracting out the interest rate on money. So what we can say is that if there's an interest rate on money, then the nominal interest rate, or like this outside option, minus this interest rate on money would be the opportunity cost of holding money, right? Because if you can hold money and there's some kind of interest you can earn on it, right? Actually, let's not even think of it as like the federal funds rate. Let's think about this as interest on excess reserves, which is what's being paid right now for a lot of excess reserves being held by financial institutions at the Federal Reserve, where after things like quantitative easing and other large-scale asset purchases, they basically really increased the size of the money base, and then they started paying a lot of these banks that had this, massive increase in the money base, meaning an increase in reserve balances. They started paying them interest on excess reserves. So that was kind of an incentive of sorts to not lend that money out, because, well, you could lend it out, you'd eventually get it back, but, if you did, there's kind of a risk of default. I mean, you would get the interest on it, but there's a risk of default. So why do that when you can just get paid interest on excess reserves instead, right? So if you hold on to that money, well, then you're going to be getting this interest on excess reserves. And why in the world would you want to lend it out if you're getting free money for holding money, right? So if we subtract that out from the value of the outside option, which was just the capital RT with no superscript M there, right? If we subtract that out, well, then that gives us the opportunity cost of holding money. And so we got to ask ourselves, what are we giving up? Like, what are you giving up by holding on to your money, right? If you've got a couple of $1,000 right now and you want to hold on to it, what are you giving up by holding on to that money? What are you foregoing so that you can keep all that money in a jar under your bed because you haven't trusted the bank since the crash in 29, right? What are these things, right? It could be a lot of things. There's some examples. You could buy bonds, right? If you bought a bond, then, especially if you bought like a government bond, the government's never going to default on its debt. That's just not going to be a thing. So if you bought a government bond, now watch the government actually default on its debt like 6 months from now, and then I'm sitting here looking like a jackass. But if you were to buy a bond, assuming the government isn't going to default, then, if the interest rate is high enough, right, you buy the bond today, let's say it's a $1,000 bond, and you hold on to it for 1 year, and it has a 5% interest rate, right? So that $1,000 bond gets paid back in full a year from now with another $50 on top of that, right? So you just got an extra $50 for doing something else with your money besides keeping it in a jar. So there's that, right? And imagine if it was a 10 or 15% interest rate. Well, that's all of a sudden a lot better than just that 5%, right? 10% interest rate. Okay, cool. That means you let them hold $1,000 now, you get $1,100 back in a year. Can't really say that's all that bad, to be honest with you. You could buy land, right? If you buy land, hold on to it and just wait until a bunch of developers come to the area, turn around and then sell the land. Boom, you probably just made a lot of money off of that. Let's say you're in a band that makes progressive / melodic deathcore, like my little 2-man group that I'm in right now. You could buy guitars for your band. That would be like investing in your business, right? If you want to invest in your business, that's like, why the hell wouldn't you do that? Because there would be an expected return on that. If you invest in something, you're buying capital goods. And if you're buying these capital goods, you're buying it to be able to expand your business, to expand the reach of your business. If you're in a band and you're trying to make music, it could be like, the guitars, certain guitars sound better than others. They're made out of different types of wood. They're made out of different qualities of these woods. They have different pickups. They have different scale lengths. There's all sorts of things that go into guitars that make certain guitars sound and play way better than others. There's really a big reason why a lot of like really super famous musicians play like, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 guitars. If you don't believe me, take a listen to any Dream Theater album ever made. Start with Images and Words, by the way. Images and Words is great. Pull Me Under, Surrounded. If you're into really proggy stuff, Under a Glass Moon, the guitar solo, and that's like 1.5 minutes long, and it's amazing, but I'm tangent. Wow. Okay, focus, Jeremy. If you buy guitars for your band, that's like investing in your business, right? Well, you may not want to hold money if you can put that money to use that basically generates a higher rate of return than just what holding the money does for you. So that would be the outside option. That would be reflected through the interest rate, right? Like the rate of return that you would get if you didn't just hold on to the money. Because this interest rate on money, or really just this interest rate in general, is the opportunity cost of holding idle cash, right? This cash could be put to use, but you choose not to put it to use and hold it for other reasons. And we'll talk about why you want to hold it for other reasons in the next chapter that's coming up. But for right now, it's just, what the hell? Maybe you want to hold on to it for a rainy day. So there's like a precautionary demand for money, things like that. But overall, if you're holding this idle cash, you're not getting anything from it. So if you're not getting anything from it, then, unless you want to save it for a rainy day, or there's just, there's a certain amount of money that you need to have on hand to be able to, pay your rent, groceries, stuff like that. Right? But there's like extra money that you're holding on to. Why not do something with it, right? That interest rate reflects that quote unquote, why not do something with it comment that I just made. Excuse me. So enough of that. And okay, so moving on. So this opportunity cost of holding idle cash that I've said before, and I've just, recently just said again, and I'll probably say it at least 1 or 2 more times throughout this lecture, is reflected in the interest rate, right? How much are you going to give up to hold on to one additional dollar? Well, if there's a 0 interest rate on money, then you're just giving up this RT, this R sub T, we call it, per dollar, right? So for every additional dollar that you're holding on to rather than doing something else with, right, you're giving up that interest rate. Because if you did something with it, now you're not losing that interest rate per se, right? It's not like every time you hold this dollar, you're going to lose, the interest rate's 5%, that you're going to lose 5 cents. No, you're missing out on an opportunity to get that additional 5 cents, right? Economic theory 101 here, right? The cost of something is what you have to give up in order to be able to get it. Well, if you want to hold on to that dollar, that's what you're getting, but you have to give up the possibility of getting that return on it. Now, if there is a non-zero interest rate on money, then what you're doing is you're actually giving up this RT minus RM per dollar, rather than just giving up this RT per dollar. Okay, so let's talk about the role that income plays when it comes to the demand for money. If income goes up, well, you can demand more money, so you will demand more money. Therefore, money demand is positively influenced by income. But money demand is decreasing in the interest rate, right? I just spent probably 7 to 8 minutes explaining why it would be decreasing in the interest rate. Now we can see that it actually is. Whether it is this R sub t or R sub t minus Rm sub t, it doesn't matter. It is still decreasing in the interest rate. If the interest rate's higher, there's an outside option that you can pursue. And in doing so, you earn more by going after that stuff rather than just holding on to this idle cash. So if the interest rate's higher, you're going to forego holding money right now because you can get more later. Like if you buy a bond that has a high interest rate with no risk of default, right? If it's got like a 10% interest rate, what the hell? Why not just give up a little bit of that money right now? Because you're going to get it back later. There's no risk of default. So if you get it back and you get a little bit of interest on top of that, like, seriously, why not? Why wouldn't you do that? There's really no reason. So let's look at the plot of the money demand curve. Well, that's this right here. So you can see that we've got the interest rate on the vertical axis, right? So we can think of that as like the price of money. We've got the nominal quantity of money on the horizontal axis. That's why it's the capital MT there, right? Now, we can see there's this RT prime. What is that RT prime? Well, that RT prime is an interest rate that is so high that it induces you to hold absolutely zero money because you want to do other stuff with that money. Because the interest rate's so high, you have every incentive to do stuff with that idle cash. But we can see, let's drag this mouse over here. I hope you can see this little hand here. This right here is what's known as a corner solution, right? This is where there's really not much participation in the market because, well, yeah. But at interest rates, you're going to want to hold a little bit more money. So if the interest rate is over here, well, you'll hold this amount of money. And that keeps going on and on and on and on and on until it eventually flattens out. Now you can see that it is decreasing, right? It's falling, but it is falling at an increasing rate. No, decreasing rate. It's decreasing at a decreasing rate. Why is it doing that? Well, you can see it's falling, but it's slowing down. Now, eventually it flattens out, and it flattens out at this RT double prime. What is this? Well, this is what's known as an effective lower bound, right? At the effective lower bound, right, the demand for money won't be affected at all at that point, right? So once we're at this RT double prime, if the demand for money is, I don't know, $1 trillion or $5 trillion, it won't matter. The interest rate will be the same. Now, there's been a lot of research on this stuff, and I'm not going to get too far into this. The lecture notes go with this fairly well. So, yeah, I'm not going to waste too much of your time on this stuff, but there is some fairly interesting research and literature on this stuff, and by some, I mean a lot, where they're really curious about what that quote-unquote effective lower bound is. For a while, they thought it was above zero. They thought it was positive, like what you see in this graph right here. And then, through the 2000s, they thought, okay, maybe it's zero. And then towards the late 2000s and then 2010s, they started going, might actually be below zero. And when they thought it was at zero, that was actually the big to do, I guess, with the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008, where the Federal Reserve was like, oh my God, we've cut interest rates really, really low, and the economy isn't responding as we thought it would. And that can be mildly problematic because once the interest rate is at zero, if the Federal Reserve is using the interest rate as their policy tool, their policy instrument, so to speak, if they're using that as their policy instrument and they're stuck at zero, well, you can't really go below zero because a negative nominal interest rate just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us. Because if there's a positive nominal interest rate, well, okay, that makes some sense because you're like, okay, well, the interest rate is positive. I want to borrow money. Well, I'll pay the money back, but then I got to pay a little interest on that. But when it's negative, all of a sudden it's like you're paying storage fees, right? You got to go like, hey, I need to borrow money, and you've probably already got so much money you don't know what to do with it. So I'll tell you what, how about I borrow the money from you? And on top of that, I'm going to pay you a storage fee to hold that money. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense to me either. So the negative nominal interest rate thing was kind of a weird, nobody really thought we could go below it. And the Federal Reserve had stated very early on that they had no intention of going into negative nominal interest rate territory. That's actually why the federal funds rate was at pretty much zero between late 2008 and the fourth quarter of 2015, when at the end of the fourth quarter of 2015, they actually raised interest rates by, I think, by like 25 basis points, where a basis point is like a 1,000th%. So if you raise it by 25 basis points, you're raising it by 1/4%. And yeah, so they raised it above that, and it was kind of getting a little higher, and then, well, thanks COVID, coronavirus hits, boom, bad news. But when we reach that effective lower bound, basically the demand for money, it doesn't matter what the demand for money is, it will be the demand for money at that one particular interest rate. It becomes flat. And this is actually where a lot of unconventional monetary policy measures come into play when we get a little bit further into the course. It has a lot to do with that effective lower bound. And so, yeah, the last thing I'll say then is you can see that we've got these different, like this MT of like YT equals 1, YT equals 10. Well, those are incomes, right? The higher your income, the more money you can demand. Right? So money demand isn't sensitive to only the interest rate. It's also sensitive to income. The higher the income you have, the more money you can demand. So if you're looking at this like, say income is $1. Well, if your income is $1, right, you will demand about this much. Income's a little higher, well, you can demand more at a lower interest rate. And then here, this is like that perfect like kink point, like that cutoff of where demand goes from downward sloping to totally flat. And we can see, right, the interest rate here is RT double prime when income is 100. When income's 1,000, well, it's also RT double prime. Right? Now, when it flattens out here, finally, promise, last thing I'll say, when it flattens out, we are in what is known as a liquidity trap. And, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to leave it there because it's like, ooh, what's a liquidity trap? I'll talk about it a little bit more in the next lecture. If you just absolutely can't wait, look up what a liquidity trap is. It's actually kind of interesting stuff. So, I'll tell you what, just go ahead and look up what a liquidity trap is, and then we can talk about it a little bit more when we get to the equilibrium conditions in money markets. That way you'll have a little bit of an idea as to what a liquidity trap is and why it would be important when it comes to dealing with monetary policy. So with that said, I am going to ring off. Enjoy this short 25-minute video. And, there's going to be more stuff to come in the very, very, very near future. So enjoy the rest of your evening and possibly your weekend as well. And I will see you either tomorrow or next week. Take care.